Welcome. My name is Jill Jonathan, and I'm with Red Wine and Blue. We are a community of women who use digital media and friend to friend organizing to change the world one suburb at a time. And we are working really hard to do it in lots of ways. And what we're going to talk about today is banned books. And we have an incredible guest with us, author Frederick Joseph, who's the author of The Black Friend.
Hi, how are you?
Welcome. We are so glad that you've joined us. Red Wine and Blue, we focus a lot on books that are banned. We have a campaign called Book Ban Busters, which is a cute name for such a sad topic. But I was just saying, like, having Fred talk to us today, like, we're putting a human face there to the people who are writing these books. And, you know, your book is so personal. And then you have people who are like, no, we don't think junior high kids and high school kids and whoever should be reading this. I mean, honestly, how does that make you
think
feel?
one of the
That's
things
just
that's
bonkers.
really hurt me is the first of all, the misunderstanding of what like the high level concept of like CRT is, right? And how the reality of many of our books is they're just our experiences, right? Like, you know, first and foremost, CRT, just before we can talk about anything, is taught at a college level, right? So none of you have a child who is in elementary, middle school, or high school, unless they are Doogie Howser or something like that, learning anything about CRT. And more times than not, it's so advanced that even people at a college level can't necessarily grasp it at times. That being said, to answer your question, like I said, it hurts because these are the experiences as a Black student in America that I faced when I was in elementary school, middle school, high school, early college. And I do think that if Black and brown people are old enough to experience racism, then I think everyone should be old enough to learn about it.
Yeah, that is so interesting. And one of the perspectives of your book is on being a better white person, right? So you talk a lot about calling upon white people to become active accomplices rather than passive allies in the fight. Like this, as a white woman, right? That's something I would like to learn about. And why does that threaten so many people?
I think that it's in the
question.
same way. I tell people all the time, I'm not asking white people to do anything different than I'm asking myself to do as a cishet man, right? Like if there's a book that says, hey, this is how you're a better man in society that's deeply patriarchal, great. Let me read that 25 times, right? And I don't understand the fragility around people not wanting to be better. It's really that simple, right? Don't we want to be better for each other and move the needle? Most people just sadly don't, right? Because it benefits them to keep oppression going. And that's just the reality of it, right? Like the Ron DeSantis's of the world, the Greg Abbotts of the world, they want people to be ignorant because they benefit from people's ignorance.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. I saw this quote from someone, a spokesperson for Pen America. I'm sure you're familiar with Pen America. So this, and I'm going to just read this real fast because it kind of picks up on what you just said. This censorist movement is turning our public schools into political battlegrounds, driving wedges within communities, forcing teachers and librarians from their jobs, and casting a chill over the spirit of open inquiry and intellectual freedom that underpin a flourishing democracy. And that's the whole ballgame, because that is exactly what so-called conservatives like Sarah Sanders and Ron DeSantis and Mike Pence, that is what they don't want, because that electorate does not favor them politically. That's like the whole ballgame. They want us ignorant. They want us incurious and unintellectual.
Right? Like people understand that a Ron DeSantis would not be in power if people were not ignorant, right? So you have to keep people ignorant to maintain your power. And realistically, the strategy is keep them ignorant at the earliest levels. So that means elementary school, middle school, high school, etc. And they've turned the classroom into, like the person said, a political battleground, right? They've criminalized the job of educators. And I don't just mean people in classrooms like teachers, librarians. They've criminalized the jobs of bus drivers, the lunch aides, so on and so forth. Like no one feels safe now being in a school and actually trying to move the needle progressively on any topic. And quite frankly, like that's fascism, right? And I don't think that we put enough emphasis on that word when it comes to what's actually happening.
Right. You should be afraid as an educator or someone affiliated with education to have a book. You should be afraid that you could be arrested if you lose your job. I mean, that Jill has a friend that she knows in the state of Florida who wants to go off the record, wants to be anonymous, wants to talk to her without revealing their identity for fear. I mean, that is what you said, that is fascism. It's absolutely terrifying. I mean, it's 2023, and this is what we're looking at now.
And when the teachers are scared to speak up, and when people who are just writing about their personal experience, like how can anyone argue with you about your personal experience? It's your experience. And we can all learn from each other. You know, we are storytellers here. And if I tell my story, you could learn something. If you're going to tell me your story, I can learn something. And I just want to put a call out to fellow white people. Listen, we can all do better. It's true. Just accept it, and it will make you a better person. Like you were saying,
Right.
Don't you want to be a better person?
So again, that's heartbreaking is, so if you read my book, and I think most people who have read it, like the book has 5 stars across the board on multiple outlets, so on and so forth, because everyone's like every white person who's read it's like, hey, I actually didn't expect this to be so conversational and at times funny, right? My approach to even talking about race is one where I want people to feel like, hey, we're sitting together, we're actually friends, and we're just trying to be better. I don't see what's wrong with that, right? Like I just don't understand. But the truth is that at the root of what's wrong with it is white supremacy, right? And I do think that right now, as I've said, to many people, not just in terms of books about race, but books about queer identities, books about women, books about disabled people, right? Like every one of us needs to like know that there's a line in the sand, and we need to be fighting, you know, tooth and nail on that other side of that line. Because I think that right now we're losing, quite frankly, like, and it's sad to say, but we are losing this battle at the moment.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it is what you said. It's not, these are not titles that are just about race and racism. In the state of Texas, one of the other titles that's banned is Roe versus Wade, a woman's choice, ? I mean, they're also coming after abortion, LGBTQ representation and issues. It's a slippery slope, right? So that there's this boogeyman, which is CRT, which anybody who just really does a second of research, not on Facebook, folks, but a second of legitimate research would understand, like you said, it's a graduate course. It's not something our children are being indoctrinated with. And under the umbrella of this nebulous CRT, which no one really understands, they're able to play upon white conservative parents' worst fears, worst anxieties, that they're grooming our children, indoctrinating our children. But it's again, it's a boogeyman because none of that's actually happening. But if they can scare them with this idea that they may not understand and they're not willing to do any work to look any further, there's a lot of power in that. And they can start with race or racism or indoctrination, and then it just trickles out to everything else that they have a problem with. Everything else that, again, goes back to anything that is not advantageous to them politically.
That is exactly it, right? Which is why you see, again, even in Florida right now, what started as the CRT boogeyman quickly went to you can't study certain authors in AP studies. Then it went to you can't study past a certain time in history, and then now it's going to, I saw a threat the other day that Ron DeSantis is saying he's just going to cancel AP English altogether in the future. You know, this is not about comfortability or even fragility. It's just literally about people trying to maintain hatred and bigotry so that they can maintain the status quo and inherently maintain the power structures. And that's what it boils down to.
Yeah. So any brilliant ideas of what we can do? I think talking about it is definitely a great start, and I'm glad we're having this conversation, but I'm just curious, Fred, like what are your thoughts?
Yeah,
like
so
what are some things we could actually do?
I've been telling people, and something I was actually talking with folks at Penn America and you know, my dear friend Sari Beth Rosenberg, who's an educator here in New York, you know, we need to actually make an investment in fighting back, right? Because like the conversations are great. And I'm happy that we're doing this because we have to raise awareness. But they're actually creating policy. They're actually, not just, quote unquote, canceling our books, but they're actually uplifting other people's books, right? Like in the same category on Amazon that one of my books is in, Patriarchy Blues, which is now banned in many prisons around the country because it talks about toxic masculinity and they don't want men to be less toxic. In that same category now, one of the leading books is Tucker Carlson, right? And that's because the right is making an investment in making sure their ideologies are actually platformed. So I think that we need to actually make a time investment, a financial investment, a bandwidth investment in all sorts of ways in making sure that these titles are not just like, oh, I just bought a book and put it on the shelf. Like, no, get them in your little free libraries, send them to schools, make sure your kids are reading them. Tell your local politicians, are you supporting any policies or creating any policies that counteracts, right? And provides a safe haven for books, quite frankly, and for education.
Yeah, it's so interesting because as we talk a lot about at Red, Wine and Blue, we talk a lot about moms, right? Because there's a lot of moms, and I think you're a parent, I believe. No,
I have a
You have a
dog
dog
who I'm playing with right now, so you can see my camera shaking.
Okay.
On my like.
So you have a fur baby, but I think you understand the idea of what I'm about to say, which is that we want our children to see themselves reflected in the content that they are able to consume. And something, the way that you and I met was you came to me with a video that you had created on Twitter, and you talked about the district, one particular district in Texas, which you could talk about a little bit further, but you talk a lot about sort of the idea of representation. And as a mom, that's really important to me. You know what I mean? These aren't required books. Your book wasn't required reading in any state, but this was some kind of it was an optional book that children could read, that they would feel seen and represented in. So I would just love to hear you talk a little bit about that district in Texas.
Absolutely.
And how it kind of picks up on that.
And I appreciate you even responding when I reached out. I think we had followed each other on Twitter for some time, but we hadn't really had a conversation. And I think that, to the question that was actually posed a second ago, more of that needs to be happening also, right? We need to be in community more often, like not just, having these conversations, but reaching out to each other, right? Like I want people to feel as though people can reach out to me. I have a platform and I want to share things. I want to have the conversations that are important. And obviously you all do too. And I deeply appreciate that because I can't necessarily tap into a bunch of suburban moms on my but to the conversation about the Texas school district, it's not that situation is appalling because what it is there's a district in Houston where my book was challenged by one white couple, despite the fact that the district is predominantly, I think 70% students of color, and many parents, Black and brown parents, came to the challenges and the conversations. They said, hey, we read the book. We actually think this is a very important book, and it deeply reflects some of the things our kids go through, right? The educators in the district, the administrators and teachers in classrooms said, we support this book. We stand by this book. I heard about the situation from the educators who have to teach the book. And it was these four right-wing elected board members who supported the couple and said, despite every person who's come to this, despite the outcry of support on Twitter for us not banning this book, we're going to ban the book because it is CRT. Even when someone posed the complete definition and breakdown of what CRT is, they still called the book CRT and said we're getting rid of it because he hates white people, right? And then a white teacher said, how could he hate white people? He literally wrote a book because he believes white people can be better about these issues, right? So, that situation is just, it's like actually broken my heart, right? And to see how that happening actually started a domino effect, right? So then like a week later it happened in Florida, a week after that, 2 schools in Mississippi, and that's what happens, right? Like a book gets on people's radar as something that they can ban, and they're like, okay, great, we can get rid of the opposition, let's do it. So it's tough.
There's so much intersectionality between us, because what you're talking about is like a degradation of society, but also really an attack on democracy itself. And what you said about reaching out, like there's alliances out there that can be made, that can be forged, because we have so much in common. Because what we're up against is so oppressive, and because we're looking, you know, with an eye towards the future generations of this country, and having a firm bedrock for them to build upon. Like that's why these relationships are so important. That's why these conversations are so important. So I mean, reaching out is incredibly important. Like you said, like I'm so glad you reached out to me, and that Red Wine and Blue was able to work with you guys, because we talked to your publisher, who is amazing. And unfortunately, what she pointed out to us is that the banned book library bench is very deep in the publishing world right now. And people maybe don't go about their days and they don't think about this, and how this may impact them. It might be, maybe that's someone else's issue. It's not, this doesn't impact or affect me, but it does. And I think it's so important that we have these conversations, so we can illuminate just, you know, how this impacts everyone.
Yeah.
Please.
And oh, go ahead, please go. Well, I was just going to say something that you mentioned, because I was thinking of, you know, what can we do is always my question. What can we do? And when you were saying that just a couple was like, this book should be banned, and the educators, the students, the other parents are like, no, we love it, we love it. But then there were board members who listened to that couple. And I will tell you, like, Joe knows like how crazy my school board is with my I have 2 school age kids, and I am telling people, you have to pay attention to your school board. You really do. It's not something I paid attention to until recently, but they have so much more power than you even realize. And the thing is, even if you don't have kids in that school district, if you pay taxes in that school district, you vote for those people. So you need to be familiar of who is on that board and when the next election is and who's running. It's so important, because that's where they're going through the school board.
Yeah,
and so it's interesting that you mentioned that.
They're able to shape the education, the access that their children have to books like Frederick's. It's like there's a lot of power in very small number of hands that is disproportionate to what the will of the people is. And that is, again, what the intersectionality is here of the anti-democratic, that's what they're doing.
That is such an important point, because you look at a group like Moms for Liberty, right? And as much as I despise them and so many other right-wing groups, their strategy is actually smart, right? Instead of saying we're going to solely influence presidential elections or, you know, elections for Senate and things like that, they're actually looking at where can the change be made in nuanced, strategic ways that people don't realize, right? I think that we are civically illiterate oftentimes in this country, and that's a major issue. People don't know, right? And it's not necessarily the fault of people, but people don't know that on a local level, the amount of influence that your city council members have, the amount of influence that your board members have, the PTA has, so on and so forth, right? To like allocate money, ban books, change, you know, just all sorts of things, right? They have altered the entire landscape basically now of education in this nation within the last 2 years, without most people even realizing that it was happening.
So important. They're reshaping the future from a local level. Like most of us pay more attention to the sensational elections that are on a national scale, right? But really, a lot of the damage is being done right.
Yeah.
And
I think one thing I want to add too about, you know, how systemic this issue is. So it's not just a matter of books being banned and it's like, oh, that sucks, you know, now these kids can't access your book. You actually, as an author, like if I can give you like a breakdown of what happened. So let's say, for instance, my books are banned throughout Florida and my books are banned throughout Texas, and let's say banned throughout Mississippi, which they are right now. That actually means that you can't have as much of a market share as other authors, right? And so when publishers are looking to sign you to more deals, or you want to come out with other books, they're going to look at like, hey, this is a business at the end of the day. And you as a Black author, you as a queer author, you as a woman who's an author, you actually literally cannot sell as many books because these places won't let your books exist there, right? And so there's already begun this like there's already less marginalized people in publishing in the first place, right? Like there are more, so that's another thing, right? But like now you're going to get to this point where it's like, oh, not only are we making sure our kids can't read the books, we're going to make sure the books are never written in the first place, right? That's truly a part of the danger of this situation. Is I think Black authors made up 2% or 3% of all published authors in the United States last year, something like that. At most, it was like 5%. So now what happens in a world where you just can't be read anywhere? Like you and your existence is banned. It's a slippery slope. It's very dangerous.
Oh, it's a blooming onion, basically, of damage that's being done. And because, like, if you pull away a layer, there's another layer of awful that's been tainted by the layer above it. Like that's something that I don't even think, I don't know, Jill, I personally would never even really have considered what you just said. And that's why it's really important for people to get awareness on the books that are out there that are being banned, so that authors like you can be seen and can have their work purchased, and so that maybe we can mitigate some of that damage that's being done.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm like, this is your livelihood.
Yeah.
This is your profession. This is how you're making your money. Yeah, so I was very curious, like how that affects you as an author when people are literally banning your books. But I never thought then that makes it harder for people who are like buying the new books, or publishers who are taking on the new books.
It's so systematic, right? It's no different, I'd say, even in like the efforts that we're seeing from the right to disturb the woke agenda, as they call it, to film and television, right? Like I see so many shows, like just while we're on the topic, there was a show recently. It was a Lord of the Rings television show on Amazon. And it was getting so bombed because there were Black and brown characters and women characters who were like leading the charge in the show, that Amazon had to remove reviews from being accessible because they didn't actually reflect the quality of the show. So now if you look at the reviews, it would seem as if the show wasn't good. The show was actually excellent. But so many people review bombed it that like it actually is deterring people from watching the show because they think it's not good because so many, right-wingers bombed the show. And these are the type of things, once again, that strategically happen, where it's like, oh, we're going to get on the most granular levels, we're going to make sure these people can't make anything. If you are a woman, if you are Black, if you are queer, you will never produce anything in this country. And that's what they're attempting to do.
Yeah, they're trying to stem the evolution of the country, right? They're trying to stop the tide that is a natural evolution of our electorate and what we look like. They're trying, because they can't do that by any legitimate means, they're trying to cheat, and they're trying to stop and thwart what is a natural progression. And that's what this looks like, right? Like it looks like these kinds of like extreme measures, but also very nuanced layers of things where they go after creators, and they have the Moms of Liberty who do everything they do, attacking school boards, et cetera, et cetera. But it's interesting, like I keep going back to this idea that what you say about your book is that you speak to the reader as though you wish you'd spoken to your friends growing up. So again, that goes back to the idea of this like representation and voices that are being muted or silenced or banned altogether, that kids like in your position, right, that you can now kind of illuminate what they might be going through. And then if they don't see that anywhere in society, what happens to those kids?
I tell people all the time, and I firmly believe this in my heart, bigotry is learned, right? We're not born believing bigotry or bigoted ideals, rather, and ideologies. It is an absolute learned thing. And when you want someone to learn something else, you offer them another way, right? You look at the summer of 2020 and what happened around the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. And there were days where I like actually cried tears of joy, because when I was out there protesting, there were young Gen Z white people right besides me, right? Just right next to me the entire time. And that's the danger for the right, right? If you actually provide the information, the guidance, the reality of saying like, hey, look, this is a system, and this is an institution that was founded on bigotry and we can dismantle that. Oh, no, 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 no. They can't have that, right? If you actually look at when I was at the protests for bodily autonomy, after the Roe decision came out, yeah, they don't want men there. They don't want cis men there at all, right? And so they're going to amplify as much as possible the Joe Rogans and the Andrew Tates of the world. This is by design on every level to keep us separated because they know how strong we are when we're together.
Absolutely.
That's right.
When we're right. Yeah. And when we're exposed to each other realistically, right? When they don't scare us away from all of that with words like grooming and CRT and indoctrination, right, et cetera, et cetera.
And that's what I would like your book, there's kids who can see themselves represented in it, but then there's also kids like mine. I have 2 white kids, 8th grade, 5th grade, who can read this book and learn from somebody else's experience to maybe tap into some empathy and just some understanding. And that's what separates us when we see each other as the other. And we can't do that.
I think that's exactly
that's all I have to say about that.
That is 100%. And I remember, even like, once again, in one of the banning, they're not trials, but I forget what they're called, but like one of the banning meetings, the town halls or whatever, this white woman comes up and she's like, no self-respecting white person would read this book. He hates white people, once again. And it was funny because the first 2 people to blurb the book were 2 white women, right? Like the first people who ever read the book, and the person who edited the book is a white woman, right? Like the person who like actually acquired the book in the first place, edited the book, is my wonderful editor, Kaylin. And the first person who got the book and read it was Chelsea Clinton. And like, she was the first blurb for the book. And she loved the book so much. My young adult book that's out with my wife now, she's in our next book and she's interviewing about disinformation. Like, no, it's not a matter of hating yourself. It's a matter of wanting to be better and move the needle.
Yeah. Absolutely, and not be so siloed, which is what they want. They can divide us so much more easily if we're siloed, and if they make power about identity that, as honestly superficial as the color of our skin, then they win, and that's what we're fighting against. I'm so excited that we got to have this conversation with you. I want to have more of them, right?
Yeah. Definitely. This isn't the only book. I mean, we've talked about The Black Friend a lot, but can you just tell us just quickly about the other books that you've written? So my follow-up to The Black Friend was actually an adult book called Patriarchy Blues,
in which I reflect on toxic masculinity, hard topics like rape culture and vulnerability, violence, and just trying to help us better understand the various manifestations of patriarchy, including homophobia and transphobia. And that book came out, did very well from the beginning, but I'll be really frank, I signed the deal not knowing HarperCollins is owned by Rupert Murdoch. And so the book came out, and I don't think a lot of people know that. Yes, Rupert Murdoch, Rupert Murdoch, who owns Fox News, also owns HarperCollins. And HarperCollins has been, their staff have been on strike for about almost 70 days now, for fair wages and time off and things like that. And in the typical Rupert Murdoch fashion, they have not gotten anything. So when that book came out and did well, they like buried it because it came out with one of their imprints, and I guess they found out about it on a higher level and they just absolutely buried the book. But whatever. My third book actually was co-written with my wife. It's called Better Than We Found It. That came out in November. And it's kind of a progressive manifesto. We cover everything in there from education reform to anti-racism, again, homophobia, transphobia, disinformation. And it's for young people to help them understand, and adults, kind of the moment that we're in the moment we've been in for some time. And in that book, we actually have interviews with Elizabeth Warren, Chelsea Clinton, Robert Reich, Julian Castro. So it's also started being banned as well because of some of the people who were in the book supporting the book. And then my final book that came out recently was the tie-in picture book for the Wakanda Forever film. So that came out with the film a few weeks ago, or I guess months ago now, time is flying. And those are my books so far, and I'm just working diligently over here on my debut novel, and hopefully that's not banned. So.
Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you so much. And just one more question that I have too
Uh,
is, do you have a favorite bookstore, online or local? I mean, that you would
oh,
want people
absolutely,
to
and I
go to
appreciate you
purchase your
asking. So
books?
I'm so big on indie bookshops, and bookshop.org, for those who don't know, is an online retailer, which actually part of their sales go back to indie bookstores around the country. So I tell people all the time, if you can, gotta support the indies, right? So my favorite bookstores are any bookstore that's owned by individuals versus corporations. So if you can get into your local bookshop or go on bookshop.org, that is always what I advise people to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So
Joe, anything
just
else?
somebody just said you need to run for public office, and I second that. I saw that.
I
I
was
second that.
I was gonna say that one of you needs to do it. So we'll have, the three of us will have to navigate which of us does it, but we actually do need more people who want us to be together, doing the things that are necessary, and that does mean taking public office and trying to actually make the world better. So
Yeah.
Yeah. That's definitely one way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. You are a forever friend of Red, Wine, and Blue, so I'm sure we will do more things together. And I just want to let everybody know, I mentioned it in the beginning, but we have a troublemaker training tomorrow night at 7:30. You can go to redwine.blue to sign up for it. And it's about book bans and what you can do about it. So definitely check that out. Joe, Fred, love this conversation. So
Watch for a bookshop.org on our website, because we'll be launching that, and all the books
yeah.
authors that we talked about and books will be featured on our bookshop as well.
Yep, that's right. So look out for that. And
I was
we love dogs here at Red, Wine, and Blue.
there you go.
I just heard.
Oh, I love it.
Yes, we are very dog friendly. So anytime we can see a dog or hear a dog, we're happy about it.
Agreed.
So, all right, y'all. Thank you so much for joining.
Have a good one, everyone.
It was great to meet you.